today, and aloha, and warm Pacific greetings to all of you. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here to have this dialogue and conversation about climate change with all of you today. I want to share just a little bit about my background and sort of how I got connected to this project. My background is actually in social science. I have a doctorate in medical and environmental anthropology. But when I was presented with the opportunity to participate in this project, which deals with climate change, agriculture, and food security, as a Pacific Islander myself, my ethnic background is Tongan. I felt like it was really important that I needed to be a part of this project because climate change is such an important and urgent issue for our communities. So I've learned a lot in this process, and I'm not an expert in climate change, but I do believe that it's important to involve many different perspectives and conversations about climate change because it affects our communities and it affects all of us in very different and complex ways. So I want to thank Adrian for warming us up and bringing us together this morning, also highlighting the youth. So when we were planning the project, Adrian and Mark and some folks, Mark Flores and some folks from Youth Affairs said, let's get the youth involved. And I'm always amazed, and you have these filming studios, I'm amazed at how creative and intelligent our youth are. So I think it was important that we started with their voices because oftentimes the conversations and the narrative that surrounds climate change is really technical, it's really scientific, and sometimes it comes from the top down, and then we're left to sort of deal with trying to figure out what it really means and how it connects to the issues that we're concerned about here. So as we know, one of the main focuses of this conference, climate change, is to look at how climate change impacts are connected or related to the agricultural sector. And so what we're going to do today is kind of tease out what some of those relationships are, look critically at what the climate impacts are specifically for the Pacific Islands and specifically for CMI. So when we were thinking about organizing these forums, we could have just had it in Hawaii, and this often happens, and I hope that folks come and then sometimes the information and the data is focused specifically on one place. What we're going to do is localize the dialogue and also highlight localized information. So I'm going to begin by talking about two really important concepts, which are vulnerability and resilience. And both of those are intimately connected, and they're quite complex. And so I'm going to talk about these ideas within the context of a changing climate. After my talk, we're going to shift more into a more technical sort of overview of what the climate impacts and projections are for CMI and for the Pacific region. But right now, I just kind of want to provide a framework and sort of deconstruct some of these concepts that we hear a lot: climate vulnerability, climate resilience. Look at what that means, and then also highlight a little bit about the projects that are currently happening to build resilience here in CMI. So we'll begin. I also have to mention, I have to give a quick shout out. When I was going to high school in Oregon, one of my best friends was actually from Saipan. And so I just want to say that being here is such an honor because I have a special place in my heart for people of Saipan. Just wanted to give that quick shout out before I forget. So I'm going to just try to provide a brief overview of what vulnerability and resilience means in the Pacific Islands within the context of a changing climate. So I'm going to talk about climate vulnerability specifically, different ways of understanding it. I'm going to talk about regional climate impacts that we know of now. And then I'm going to talk about a systems approach, which is sort of a more holistic approach that we're trying to promote through our work through connecting with extension. Is the volume okay? Yeah? Okay. And then I'll talk a little bit about climate resilience and then connect that to our island settings and then also the agriculture sector. Oops, sorry. Okay, so what does climate change mean for Hawaii and the Pacific Islands? So we started talking a little bit about that with the agent today. I just want to emphasize a couple of critical points to sort of frame the conversation. The Pacific Islands, as many people know, actually only contributes to 0.3% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, Pacific Islanders and Pacific Islands suffer perhaps the greatest and most immediate threats to climate change. So understanding and coping with and learning new and different ways of adapting to climate change is really vital to the survival of the islands and island populations. Okay, I want to get this straight. Okay, so here's just a couple more visuals of some of the climate impacts that we are currently facing and that we will continue to face as island populations. This is a cyclone that hit Fiji a few years back. Here's some flooding in the Marshall Islands. So some of the impacts, some of the specific impacts are have to do with increased frequency of storms, and then the flooding and drought usually accompanies that. So when thinking about vulnerability, I want to talk a little bit about what some of the characteristics are, how it's measured, and then moving forward, what makes an island environment vulnerable and what can we do about it. Okay, so there's a group in Hawaii that is connected to the National Climate Assessment, which is done in the continental U.S., just an overview of the climate impacts. There's a group in Hawaii that does a Pacific Regional Assessment Report, and so this is just a summary of some of the impacts that they reported in 2012. Climate impacts and vulnerability in the Pacific. Some of the impacts that we see now are surface air temperatures are rising. We've also seen that over the past century, rainfall has decreased across much of the region. There has been a slight increase in rainfall in the westernmost Micronesian islands. I think the key here is that there's greater variability, and it's become a little bit more difficult for folks to predict kind of what the climate cycles will look like. Groundwater discharge to streams has significantly decreased. Mean sea levels are rising, particularly in the western Pacific. This hits the atolls, which are closer to sea level, much more dramatically. The frequency and intensity of climate extremes are changing. Drought has been more frequent and prolonged, and there have been fewer tropical cyclones. So I know a lot of folks out here kind of measure the time in between the typhoons, and when the typhoons don't occur in the same patterns, it can be quite unsettling not knowing what to expect. Habitats and species distributions have also changed due to the changing climate in the Pacific. And finally, ocean heat content is rising and the ocean chemistry is changing. This has, the chemistry change in the ocean has a direct impact on the coral reefs. Okay, so defining climate vulnerability. The IPCC, which is an international group on climate change, defined vulnerability as the degree to which a system is susceptible to or unable to cope with adverse effects of climate change, including climate variability and extremes. Vulnerability is a function of the character, magnitude, and rate of climate variation to which a system is exposed, its sensitivity to the impacts, and its adaptive capacity, so its ability to adapt. That all together sums up the vulnerability of an island. The term system includes species, ecosystem, and society, so it's a broad reference. And finally, assessing the vulnerability of a system requires an analysis of the exposure and sensitivity to climate variation and change, and the adaptive capacity of the system to cope with the variation. So I'm going to break this down a little bit. Oftentimes there's this equation that's used to determine what the vulnerability of a particular place or island is. And so I'll talk a little bit about what those different parts of that equation involve. Okay. So the first part really of beginning to understand what the vulnerability of a place is through doing a broad assessment. And fortunately, the CNMI is quite ahead of the game in terms of the other Pacific Islands. There have been 2 vulnerability assessment reports that have been completed, one in Saipan. If you see the image on the far right, this report was done by one of our speakers is coming here today from NOAA. Robbie Green participated in putting this report together. So it's a vulnerability assessment of Saipan. And it was done in 2014. And there was another vulnerability assessment that was done for Rota and Tinian too, also by Robbie Green. So you have a really important resource available to you now. Many of the other islands, Guam, for example, does not have a vulnerability assessment. Hawaii doesn't have a vulnerability assessment. So Saipan is really leading the game in this. But what is important to know is, I believe, is that this resource exists, number one, and then the other part is making sure folks have access to it. So we included this report on the flash drive that we put on your name tag, so you all will have access to this report when you leave today. Okay. Okay, so looking at this vulnerability equation. And this is actually pretty technical for me because remember, I'm a social science person. But I try to break it down in simple terms just to kind of understand what's involved. So first, you look at the exposure that an island, an individual, a community, whatever it is that you want to kind of look at or assess, you look at their exposure to a particular hazard. So exposures to particular hazards plus the sensitivity of that particular island, person, community, minus their adaptive capacity, so their ability to adapt to that hazard or that threat, equals someone's vulnerability. So when we look at, for example, we look at atolls, low-lying atolls in the Pacific. Their exposure to sea level rise is high. Their sensitivity is high. Their ability to adapt is variable, which leads to high vulnerability. So when we talk about low-lying atolls, they're particularly vulnerable to certain climate impacts. Okay, so just another example here. Wrong way. Okay, actually a little bit more explanation about what the different components are. So exposure is considered the nature and degree to which a system is subjected to significant climate variations. Sensitivity, again, is the degree to which a system is affected, either adversely or beneficially, by exposure to the direct and indirect effects of climate change. And then finally, adaptive capacity, which I think is the more interesting thing that we'll talk about throughout the forum today, is the ability of a system to adjust to climate change, including climate variability and extremes, to moderate potential damages and to take advantage of opportunities or to cope with the consequences. Okay, so here's just another kind of breakdown of this equation. So if you look at, say, a day at the beach, the vulnerability of being at the beach would include someone's exposure, for example, to the sun, plus the sensitivity. So this poor fellow over here is particularly sensitive to sun. And his adaptive capacity, unfortunately for that day, by not wearing sunscreen, meant that he is very vulnerable to the heat of the sun. Okay? Just to illustrate. When thinking a little bit more specifically about particular climate impacts and how it affects the agriculture sector, we'll look at another scenario here. Well, actually, we'll look at dimensions and then we'll work in our way to another scenario. So the different dimensions, I think it's important to remember, they're complex and they're ranging in variation. So vulnerability can be measured at the environmental level. We can look at the vulnerability of certain plants to climate change. We can look at the vulnerability of animals to climate change. We can look at entire systems, for example, agriculture or fisheries. We can look at the vulnerability of landscapes. On a sociocultural level, we can also look at the vulnerability of individuals. We can look at the vulnerability of households, communities, and even countries. Okay, so here's a more pointed scenario that I kind of want to walk you guys through. So we can take, for example, a small-scale farmer. This is a farmer in Fiji at the market in Nausori, Fiji. And we're going to look at her vulnerability as a farmer, okay? So she's at the market, and what would you imagine she would be exposed to as a threat? As a farmer, what would you imagine the threats might be for a farmer? Climate threats. Any crop loss? What else would it look like? Disease, pests, flooding, drought. Yes, okay. So in this particular instance, the threat that she's facing is heavy rainfall events, okay, which can lead to flooding and which can lead to waterlogged crops and crop loss. Okay, her particular sensitivity is poor drainage systems, okay, and her adaptive capacity, minus her adaptive capacity, so this is variable, and I think this is why it's important for us to have really critical conversations, is how do we support and increase an individual's adaptive capacity? Okay, so minus her adaptive capacity is the measure of her vulnerability as a farmer and the measure of the vulnerability of an entire food production system. Okay, so I'm going to show a short film now, about 3 minutes, and it's going to talk a little bit about some of the vulnerabilities that folks in Fiji are facing to climate change and the agriculture producers there and what they're dealing with. So, okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. And so this video was put together by the SPC. How many of you are familiar with the SPC? The regional group. So they have a Pacific Island Climate Adaptation Program, and they put together these short videos. Let's see here. Okay, so we'll take a look at that
now. We just mix it with coconuts, not milk, the juice of the coconut, then with sugar, then cover it with a plastic or any leaves, then cook it, and you have it with tea. Very nice.
We cook it as something like potatoes. In the sunny place, it's a bit sticky. If you turn it in a hilly place, it's a bit dry. But we like it, the one we get from the Swami place. Yeah.
See, right in the beginning, God gave to even Adam to look after the garden.
The Fijian people is like the staple food. For those chicken families, the dal to them is the tal to them is a staple food that is a cheap food.
A large increase in the incidence and intensity of extreme rainfall. The ensuing floodwaters are simply overwhelming the current drainage systems in Fiji's low-lying agricultural areas. And when the rivers and creeks are unable to drain excess water, crops are ruined. Healthy local foods become scarce. The local economy is threatened, and the staple diet of the Fijian people is compromised.
When the flood came, it was our crops, the cassava, it was really And I saw, because it was, all the cassava were ready to be pulled. And then the water came over it, and even the taros too, it happened to the taro, and people were running around asking for food, but, there was nobody to supply it.
Production of food is of course vital to all humans. But to the poorest Fijians, it also plays an important economic role.
In terms of their subsistence crops, they have to grow this type of crop for their everyday needs. And also for commercial purposes so that they can pay out school fees for their children to go out and attend whatever school from primary to secondary right up to the university.
And with 50% of local employment and 43% of export earnings coming from the agricultural sector, it's crucial that Fiji be able to produce enough food for both overseas and local markets. But sadly, under current climate pressures, this is not always possible.
Most of the taro nowadays are going for export. You get 3 to 4 flights this year. That's why if you come around in the market now, you can find a lot of cassava and you can find a lot of dollars around. And the price too, from $10 a bundle now going up to 20 to 25, even $80 a bundle.
This is a real bad situation for these local communities, and the impact of it from the social point of view, economic point of view, and also with the, along these environmental problems is creating this effect on food, only food. This creek has not been cleared for quite a long time, maybe around 10 years. It's still blocked with weeds, and there's no flow at all. The flow is very, very slow, very slow.
Okay, I wanted to show that video just to sort of illustrate the connections between climate impacts, climate events, and then particular systems. In this instance, we're looking at food production. So living on islands, and we know this in Hawaii, and I know this from what I've heard here too to be true, is that we are heavily dependent on imports, and our ability to produce food is locally is limited. And when we have these different climate events, and for the Pacific, we're looking at impacts such as severe weather and storms. If we're cut off from our supply, what will we do, and how will we survive? How will we feed our communities if something were to happen to cut off our supply? So that in itself is an issue of vulnerability to climate change. Let's see. We will pull, if we can pull my slides back up. That would be great. Okay, so the question is, why do we need to adapt to a changing climate? We can continue as we are now and maintain things, but at the rate that the climate is changing, that may not help us out. That may not support us in the way that we need to be supported. So why do we adapt? Okay, yes. Islands and low-lying atolls tend to be susceptible to climate impacts due to their low adaptive capacity and high vulnerabilities, okay? This is our context here in the islands. In order to adapt, it's imperative to engage different people with knowledge, experience, and backgrounds to reach a shared approach to addressing these challenges. Prevention is less costly than disaster recovery. Okay? And finally, preventative planning can protect and enhance the well-being of people, ecosystems, and the built environment of the CNMI. So I want to mention that we had another speaker that had planned to be here, but unfortunately was ill. It was Rich Solis from the BECQ, who is the point of contact for climate change. So some of his slides and information is incorporated into the next set of slides that we're going to go over. So I want to make sure that I acknowledge him. Okay, so going back to this important concept of understanding adaptive capacity, which is really sort of the point that we're going to be at when we want to start thinking about what kind of solutions would be appropriate and possible for us. So adaptive capacity is one of the most important factors shaping adaptive capacity of individuals, households, and communities is their access to and control over natural, human, social, physical, and financial resources. So this statement, which actually came from the IPCC report in 2003, really brings up the issue of how we need to have many different people involved in our adaptation planning and strategies moving forward. Okay, moving forward, it's important to also understand the concept of resilience. The resilience, the ability of a community to resist, absorb, recover from the effects of hazards, really in a timely and efficient manner, while also preserving and restoring essential basic structures, functions, and identity. This is really key. The first step, I believe, is to recognize and acknowledge the strength that already exists within the community. And the fact that as Pacific Islanders, we are not, even though we're facing heavy threats of climate change impacts, we're not necessarily just victims. We have a history of adapting to the changing climate as living and thriving on these islands for thousands of years. We have an innate resilience as island people. So the first step is really acknowledging that resilience. And then the second step is really to think about ways to increase resilience to changes that are happening much more rapidly than they were in the past. Okay, so other definitions of resilience that Rich Solis actually contributed are resilience is the capacity of the community to also anticipate, plan from, and mitigate the risks and seize the opportunities associated with environmental and social change. And then finally, resilience relates to concepts of sustainability overall and the challenge of servicing current system demands without eroding the potential to meet future needs. Okay. So I wanted to bring up a couple examples of folks who are really building the resilience and using resilience as adaptive capacity. There's a project in YAP that the YAP extension folks are working on, and they work very closely with the community. This particular picture shows a community day where they're planting trees, and they're really pulling on the different networks to help come together to build the community and involve the community in taking steps to become more resilient to climate change. So just want to highlight that. Some of the projects too that folks in YAP have really done well and have been successful with have adopted this framework called climate smart agriculture. So climate smart agriculture is also a concept and a framework that we're trying to integrate into the extension programs at University of Hawaii. And it's not a new concept. I mean, it's a really sort of natural concept that all farmers really know. I mean, the work that farmers do naturally, adjust to the climate, the changes in the climate naturally, but this takes a more pointed approach that also involves some different objectives. Number one, sustaining and increasing agricultural productivity to support equitable increases in food security, farm incomes, and sustainable communities and livelihoods. That's one of the first objectives of this approach. And then number two, adapting and building resilience of agriculture and food security systems to climate change at multiple levels. And then number three, looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. So basically, in addition to adaptation, it's also mitigation, the part of reducing greenhouse gases. So it's kind of, I mean, honestly, it's almost a little bit silly to ask Pacific Islanders to really work hard on mitigation when they're contributing so little to carbon emissions. But I think that as our small island communities, we have an opportunity to provide a full model of sustainability, which includes adaptation and mitigation. So in a sense, it's an opportunity. So that's one reason why we're promoting this this framework is to be a little bit more intentional about how agriculture is integrating climate information and strategies, to adaptive strategies. Okay, so here's another example wanted to highlight. This is also coming from Micronesia. So this is in Klosrai, one of the extension specialists over there. Make sure I get his name right. Dr. Verma has been working on developing salt-tolerant sweet potatoes from tissue cultures. And so it's been a largely successful program there to develop this particular variety of salt-tolerant sweet potatoes. So this would be an example of a way to decrease vulnerability and increase resilience to climate change by integrating these climate-friendly crops. Okay, so finally in the end, I want to plug the BECQ Resilience Working Group. So again, Rich Sauce wasn't able to be here, but I want to share a little bit about what their program has to offer and what they're working on. So the Resilience Work Group, BECQ, and the Governor's Office is tasked to spearhead an interagency work group that consists of various agency representatives. The main objective is to develop a CNMI climate adaptation plan. And then finally, the Resilience Work Group is an outgrowth of the Climate Change Work Group. So the Climate Change Work Group, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm sure there's BECQ folks that are here, and I don't want to butcher your information or misrepresent you, but the Climate Change Work Group is responsible for the climate vulnerability assessment, I believe. Okay? And this is Rich Solis's contact information. So one of the things we want to do, we're from Hawaii, we don't know everything that's going on down here, but we want to make sure that we highlight the local resources and through this conversation connect you folks to those resources. So, okay, how are we on time?
We're good.
Okay, so we have about 10 more minutes, so maybe we'll open up the discussion to the group. We have a couple discussion questions on the slide. Okay. So basically, maybe I'll start off with the first question, just to kind of see what you folks are thinking about. If what I was talking about is resonating or making you think of what you're doing in your own work or what your concerns are. So the first question is, what are ways that you can assist your clientele or the community that you work with reducing their vulnerability and increasing their resilience to climate change? Okay, that's kind of a big question, but maybe just think about that. And Clay over here has a microphone, so if anyone wants to share, we will meet you with a microphone.
Good morning. My name is Joaquin Julio Gomez. I think that I already said I'm a farmer, but I'm also a fisherman, former administrator of Coastal as well as fishery director. I'm here with Mr. Ben Soblan, who's also an expert in our climate, the vulnerability of the Marianas Archipelago marine and terrestrial ecosystem, especially by anthropomorphic, both human and natural system like climate change. I think our government is doing an excellent job. The problem is, in terms of education, we have assessment vulnerability, but I think what's lacking is the enforcement. And also allowing, let me just give an example, Fiesta Hotel and the Surf Club, where the beach visitations are, but they bulldoze away, and you can see influences of coastal erosions and so forth. Another good example is the road from Capitol Hill down. I suggest the listeners go up and take a look. That in itself contributes to a major water quality erosions, effects on coral growth and so forth, as well as bringing down metals that will kill other marine plants. During our time, Ben and I, we were very strong in enforcing the environmental laws. Our Constitution mandate that every citizen of Mayana's must have a clean and healthy environment. Are we having that? As stakeholders, especially policymakers and environmental agencies, and anybody, we must do our best to protect our environment, not only for us, but our children. We don't own the earth, we're just using it for our future generations, as they say. And talk is cheap. What is important is that there has to be a political will by our leaders and the environmental agencies, regardless of who. I see an emotions of environmental politics playing into the system, and it is bad. This is our island, our home. Either we destroy it or protect it for the future. The Marianas Island is the most beautiful island in the world, and let us protect it for our children. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any ideas about ways that we can reduce vulnerability and increase resilience here on Earth?
Hello, welcome to our guests visiting our island home. I just wanted to toss something out for us to ponder when we go, and that is appreciating our islands and the vulnerabilities that we face every moment, not just every day, but every second, every minute. I've had the privilege of visiting many of our Pacific islands, and in those journeys, I appreciate the fact that I was raised by the Manamko, my grandmother, and we ate the staple foods, the ogong tamuru. And so I want us to ponder with our households, our children, and come back and ask us, how do we truly adapt? And I think it's important for us to go back to the basics, is to understand the society that we're in now. Are we trained, are we teaching our children to eat the foods that we raise from our island gardens, from our home gardens? Are we eating the root crops so that when the climate and shifts don't come, are we able to survive? And so my question is, how can we truly adapt when we don't know how to appreciate what we have? Because, and I think it's a constant struggle that my wife and I always had. And thank goodness we have home gardens. Thank goodness we eat fresh chicken, fresh poultry, fresh, stuff. But and so we're able to survive, and then I don't think we're able to survive even with that. And so I think we need to go back to basics, teach our children what we have and how can we be sustainable. And these importing of foods don't help us. And so I wish there's more students so that they can be able to understand and learn more, but it's a learning curve. And so I want us to go back and maybe reach out to the schools and work and get the message out. Education, education, education. And go out to the gardens, go out to the farms, and maybe inculcate in the minds of our children the need for us to survive, because we're not getting the message out. We truly are not. And so we can talk about it, but if we're not reaching out to the taro roots, we're really missing the curveball. So I want us to go back home and work with our homes. Have CREAS go out, have BCQ go out, have CRM, DEQ, and all the stakeholders go out to the villages, to the schools, and truly bring that message down to the taro roots. I'm really concerned. So thanks for sharing the conversation.
So we have a couple more. Right here in the center of the room. Yeah.
Buenas. I'm Gus Meritita from the Island of Royalty, Specialty Crop Program Coordinator. I understand the relevance of the presentation today in regards to ROTA, the students over there. One of the main things that I do is I go and educate students in regards to agriculture, planting processes, new technology. So there's this question, what resources are available that we can avail ourselves so that we can help our children more in terms of learning how to plant properly, eating healthy foods, and buy fresh, buy local. Thank you.
So that's an excellent question and concern, and I think that by having Chris here today especially can provide connections to a lot of those types of resources. So thank you. I think we have time for one more comment.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jesus Manibusan Castro. Right now, I'm a farmer. I'm a former educator and a fire chief here in the Sinamay. We've been encountering a lot of issues on environmental issues, actually. We have agencies to combat those things that affect our environment, but we still have a very, very short in educating our entire community. I think that great responsibility of our agencies in government are to go out there in each community and educate this community how they can truly benefit from those wastes that they're disposing on the government property. Many of these litters are being very close to the coast. They even burn so many pine trees. And those ashes has a great effect to our coral reef, our lagoon. Our island is very fragile because we are not like other micronesian islands like Palau. We have a huge lagoon and the troops. Sinamay has barely had a lagoon to enjoy. So what we need to do, this hand here has 5 fingers, but one finger cannot work alone to accomplish all these problems that we have. So if we have 6 agencies in government, let's have all these 6 agencies, from NVA, DLNR, Public Works, Mayor's Office, BUCQ, join the community and educate the community. We need to do this, otherwise our visitors can no longer enjoy the prestige of our islands. Sometimes it's scary to walk into the bushes because there's junk vehicle, broken glasses, rotten. And those things, if something happens, if our children goes into the bushes to explore what's in there, and they get accident, it will cost you for the hospital. We need to work together. It's a must. So I encourage our island leaders, from lawmakers, to make some laws that can really, truly bite. Not just the fingers, slapping the finger or flattening. Let's make laws that can truly bite. So these residents that are disposing trashes on the shore can really feel the pain. In the past we have lost, I think it's 250 for littering. They repealed the law. They went back to 25. What is 25 going to do? Only one trip of the mayor's office to Marty. Let's do something and be strong. Thank you.
I think it's just about time to just take a coffee break, but I encourage you to keep your conversations going during the break, and then we'll reconvene it. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think adding, because all of these comments that are being made, and I think even the theme throughout Trish's presentation, one of the challenges that we're already bringing up, which is really encouraging, is how we kind of take these abstract, long-term changes that we sort of, the way we frame climate change, and translate those into things we can do today, right? And I think all of these comments are actually addressing what are some of those things we can do now, and just talking with Dean Cook the other day about these things, in order for them to actually be implemented, that we need to show how they have social and economic benefits now, today. And I think that's the connection we're trying to make here, is all of these practices, what we call solutions to climate change, they're really just solutions that benefit our communities today. So it's really encouraging to see folks kind of all pulling together on the same page with that. So yeah, we'll break for 10 minutes, I think. What time is it? Yeah, so we're 15 minutes, have coffee, some refreshments, and then we'll kind of jump into what some of the science behind climate and the climate system here. So thanks everyone for your contribution.